Hey everybody, welcome to the Burn Toast Garage podcast. My name is Amy. Sitting next to me is Toastmaster Frankie. Say hi, Frankie.
Hi.
And today I want to talk about the Mini Cooper, and specifically I want to talk about how I genuinely believe that the Mini Cooper is either a parody or an angry letter to the editor.
No, the Mini Cooper's a car. It has wheels and a motor.
Yeah, but...
You know, it's a British, easy to park, fantastic handling, so small it barely exists type car.
Yes, it is that, but the first Mini Cooper was a response to the automotive industry as a whole, and to the influence of American cars specifically. Cars were getting bigger and fatter, and the engines were getting bigger and more muscular and less complicated. American cars were becoming giant floating couches, and British cars were becoming, well, American cars. Handling was losing to big power and driving straight, but most people in Britain didn't want a big car, and more than that, in huge parts of the UK, a big car can often be a huge burden.
Oh god, can you imagine driving something like a conversion van in London? Driving a Honda in Boston sometimes feels like threading an airliner through a hallway, and London's older and narrower and no. No wonder stuff like hatchbacks became popular over there. The designer must have been looking at some American muscle sedan thing and was going, oh, okay, exactly not that.
Actually, yeah, but think about the weirdly courageous thinking that takes. The first Mini was designed, as the song goes, middle fingers in the air.
Middle fingers in the air.
A direct, almost parody response to the cars of its time. You want a huge engine, huh? Do you? Well, fuck you. 0.8 of a liter out of a tiny 4-cylinder motor with one intake and 3 exhaust ports.
Wait, one intake port? Wait, what? There's 4 cylinders. How the fuck does that work?
It doesn't? Not well, at least. So one intake port. So that means that it just farts the gas into one giant staging area instead of treating the cylinders like they're, different things. And all the cylinders take from it. The bang only happens with the valves closed, but it's all taking from the same pot.
Okay, that makes sense, but why? If they still have their own valve and spot on the camshaft and everything, what space is actually being saved? I can't imagine it's much smaller.
Seriously, a couple inches maybe? But they were scrambling. I mean, they were trying to be tiny as humanly possible. They were shrinking everything they could, which... Again, you want a big car? Want to keep up with the Joneses? Mini says, fuck you. We're making it so small, we have to turn the motor and transmission sideways just to make it fit. And you know how every other car has springs and shocks? Yeah, they're too big for us. We're using little rubber cones. Like, if you want stiffer springs, you put in cones with stiffer rubber.
Huh, but the one thing people know about Minis is that they're sporty and they turn really well. I always imagine the type of person who would own an original Mini would be either just such an Anglophile that they would cut off their limbs and replace them with noodles if the Queen said so, or people who wanted to weave in and out of traffic like they were on a motorcycle, but, specifically not a motorcycle.
Well, sort of, but the motor is so tiny and the gearing is so weird that it is not fast in any traditional sense. Which, again, want to go drag racing? Want a highway cruiser? Fuck you, top speed is 75, there's 4 shifts on the way to 60. And we loved it. This tiny little nothing speck of a car is a powerful soul mover. It handles and brakes like a supercar, and you can still fit people and things in it. Didn't get the fervor here that it enjoyed in Europe, but even here, it's chic and definitively British, and even with the complex layout, it was relatively easy to work on. It's a great first car, and great for people who love cars that have a spunky underdog personality. It's Scrappy-Doo embodied in automotive form.
Okay, so it was embraced. People loved it. Doesn't that mean it's not a parody anymore? You stop being the one standing outside the system pointing and laughing when you're the system, right? They're popular now. I see them all over Boston, usually driven by people who you're pretty sure didn't actually buy it themselves, now that I think about it. They're not the geeky outsider anymore making fun of the jock from the sidelines. They're the jock, driven by a cheerleader and paid for by daddy.
Right, exactly. The new Mini did the same middle fingers in the air thing.
Middle fingers in the air.
But to the first car's fans. Oh, you like a simple, easy to work on car? Fuck you, we're shoving a supercharger and an intercooler and an extra liter of displacement and a variable valve electronic fuel injection thing with one of the most complicated valve systems known to man under the hood. You like the chic and British part? fuck you, we're German now, and we're marketing with Mark Wahlberg movies and with inflatable cars at rich people's malls so every single rich parent buys one for their partner and children. Like that it's a great first car? Fuck you, we have to pay our BMW overlord, so you have to pay BMW parts price levels.
Wait, what?
I mean, to be fair, I know mostly about the Cooper S and like the John Cooper Works models, and the base model probably has a number of cheaper parts, but the S is also the one that people think about when they talk about the new Mini, so I'm using that as a decent reference.
So they basically built the Mini to piss off everyone that liked the original Mini? What, some sort of revenge for World War II?
Yeah, pretty much. And you know what? We still liked it. We liked it even though it was a completely new car. It was still something that handled and could outpunch its weight class. We accepted the idea of a premium small car, and if it means more people are driving this instead of a Dodge Challenger or a Chevy Silverado, I'll take it.
They're probably better for the environment, not sucking down quite so much gas. And plus, like, yeah, they're still expensive, but they're popular at autocross events. They turn and brake better than stupidly expensive stuff, and they're still tiny.
Yeah, but then Mini, now under the control of BMW's massive pile of cocaine, just went batshit. First they decided to make the original Clubman, which, okay, I'll admit, these are actually a guilty pleasure of mine. They're ugly and weird and have a non-ridiculous backseat and a trunk that you can move things with.
Ah yes, a trunk you can move things with. Very cool.
Always. But like, after that they came out with the Countryman, which, no, that's not a Mini, that's a small SUV with a Mini badge on it. BMW needs to stop shoving their terrible vehicles up Mini, unnecessary surgery style.
Wait, isn't the new Mini a four-door?
Yes! As with the new Clubman, which, again, that's just a car and a wagon. And I'd actually like it if they weren't badged Mini. The JCW version makes like 230 some odd horsepower, four-wheel drive, manual. They drive like someone shoved a pepper up their tailpipe, but like, at what point does a Mini stop being a Mini? How big does a car get before the title's just like an ironic statement about how all cars are losing their small badge because we're obsessed with owning things that are bigger than our neighbors' cars?
Okay, well that leads to the big question. What is the new Mini? Honda Fit?
I mean...
It's small, it's got a tiny motor.
Well, it has a motor that isn't too powerful, I'll agree with you there, but it's a 2-liter. And if you get it with an automatic, you get paddle shifters, it's got variable valves, not really sure it counts as not complex.
No, but they're relatively easy to work on, and they're definitely good first cars, and again, small.
That's just it. Any generation of the Honda Fit is actually about twice the size of the original Mini, and it's bigger than the new, actually a Mini Cooper Coupe.
I guess. It's a decent spiritual successor though, right?
I don't know, I was thinking something more like Fiat 500, I guess? It's small enough.
Yes, a car built out of Kleenex and used coffee filters from the break room would make an awesome first car. Teaches you patience and how to fix your car, like a lot.
Yeah, there's a reason people joke about Fiat standing for Fix It Again, Tony. Alright, maybe...
Smart car? Okay, I couldn't even keep a straight face there.
I'm gonna disqualify the Spark and the IQ for being just as terrible as the Smart car
I
now.
like the IQ.
Would you want to drive one on the highway with any regularity? Tiny wheels, aerodynamics like a cardboard box or like a vertical mattress, ridiculous suspension setup, the tiny, like borderline square short wheelbase, and quite possibly the worst sightlines known to man outside of Ferrari.
Maybe. Fine.
Instant disqualification.
Wait, I thought you said the motor on a Mini would be maxing out at like 70.
80-ish, but like, yeah, what? But it can at least handle being at those speeds without falling over. And Minis have taken a ton of different motors beyond that ridiculous A series, including the Honda Type R motor, tons of different sport bike motors, people who supercharge the stock motor. Mighty car mods.
Okay, so it has to be super small, cheap, have a tiny motor, built for the modern family, capable of being tuned to a ridiculous degree, but are usually found when used as first car, or an extra car in a family.
Yeah, exactly.
So a Ford Fiesta.
I'm not sure if... Is that small enough?
Come on, the hatchback certainly is.
No, it's smaller than a Honda Fit, but not by much.
Really?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, it's one of those tricks you into thinking it's much smaller than it is cars, which, brava, but no, it doesn't, I don't think it works for this.
Why not?
What?
Why not let the sequel be larger?
Because that's the whole point! I don't know, the model that it's being the spiritual successor of was made practically as a protest to how big things were getting. Making the new one big is why the Mini isn't even the new Mini.
So what fits?
I think there actually is something that would fit. They never sold it in the US, but there's a classification of cars in Japan that are referred to as K cars. And there's a number of different models that fit into this classification. So it's everything from tiny hatchbacks and trucks and vans to sports cars, even, like the Honda Beat, which they still refuse to sell here despite it being freaking adorable. And they're tiny. And in order to get the K classification, which allows Tokyo to avoid turning into something like Mexico City or Beijing in the sense that it's not all the smog all the time, the way you can get into the K classification is by having a tiny motor and a tiny frame. It's 660 cc's, which means that it is smaller engine size-wise than the original Mini. Footprint-wise, it's about the same size as the original Mini, and they're specifically designed to be stupidly easy to work on.
So how are these different from, like, the Prius C we have everywhere around the States?
There's two big things. One, in America, I would say in Japan, the word enough is not a bad word. The K car is enough car for most people. But you can't sell that to most Americans because their view is they're not chasing the American dream if they're not going for something big and complicated and moving the future forward. K cars are simple technology engineered to their perfection. Something like a Prius C is a really advanced modern technology that we're still kind of teasing out the pieces of, because it's an electric motor combined with a gas motor, which makes working on them on your own sometimes dangerous, because remember, electric motors are basically giant magnets, and the car is basically a big metal cage, and if the magnet gets free, it will go as fast and as hard as physically possible to the cage, no matter what's in the way, fingers, limbs. And then on top of that, the Prius C is a hybrid. Hybrids store electrical energy in batteries, and all hybrids now need new batteries at around 100,000 miles, which makes them prohibitively expensive as a new car, or as a first car.
Okay, that makes sense. I'd still argue that the Prius C is sort of the K car of America because we're so obsessed with hybrids.
I would say that the K car, or that the Prius C is the closest we're gonna get to a new Mini or a K car coming here, because no matter how many times I will jump and scream and try and convince automotive manufacturers that Americans aren't idiots by having an American jumping and screaming, still not sure why that isn't working. But no matter how many times there are people complaining about it, there's not going to be a market for that kind of vehicle in the United States.
That's fair.
So the Prius is about as small as we can get. So I guess the American Mini is much like the American everything else, slightly fatter and more powerful than everything else.
So let's change gears. Why don't you tell me about how Wabi Sabi and Ichigo are doing?
Alright, I'll start with Ichigo. For those of you playing the home game, Ichigo is a black Nissan Versa hatchback. So with Ichigo, we were originally planning on painting the front bumper. I actually have the paint, it's right over there. We have a can of color-matched spray paints. We have a number of sanding options, except I've actually grown to really like the look of the having the bumper being painted primer. It gives it kind of a Subaru Outback kind of feel, but like the Satan's Subaru Outback, because it's black on soft black. So
Nothing like convincing your passengers that they're riding in Satan.
exactly. It's, that's what everyone wants, isn't it?
No, totally.
So we might also be experimenting with putting using garden edging as a way of making some side skirt extensions, and potentially also doing a bit of lower lip with that. But the only way we would consider doing that is, so Ichigo is a Nissan Versa, which just the Versa itself was sold as a number of different cars. It's the Nissan Taida in Japan and Australia. There's a couple weird knockoff versions you can buy from Mexico and Beijing. But importantly for this conversation, it is also the starting point for both the Rogue and the Juke, which has made me wonder what parts of the Juke's suspension would we be able to make fit in a Versa, and specifically, is there a chance that we would be able to make the springs and shocks fit, which would give about an inch of lift, and also give stiffer springs and shocks? So we might be able to get a little bit of that Outback ruggedy look to it as well, and some of the functionality by adding a little bit of, ability to climb through snowbanks in Boston is a thing.
No, we don't have any hills or snowbanks here in Boston.
Of course not. Why would anyone even ever consider slandering Boston by mentioning that?
And you certainly don't live on a hill yourself.
No, of course not. We're also waiting for, so they make these plastic clips that hold on the bumpers, and there are tons of forums where you can find tutorials on how to remove these things without half of them breaking, and the comments section following all of them is didn't work, half of them broke anyway, just repeated ad nauseum. So we're currently waiting on a couple sets of clips so that I can take the back bumper off and put on this, which is a backup sensor unit. So these sensors get drilled into the bumper using this lovely thing,
which adds to the Satan feel of the car.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this vaguely looks like Satan's crown. For those of you playing the home game, this is a drill bit with a circle saw bit attached to it. So first you drill the hole that you want as the guide, and then you drill again and push through, and it cuts out a perfect hole to put one of the backup sensors. So we're going to do that 4 times, put the backup sensors into the bumper, and then, interestingly, it's powered off of the reversing light. When that gets power, this gets power.
So it won't actually turn on while you're driving on the highway in the middle of traffic.
Exactly. When you have somebody, tailgating you, it's not going to be going, "Oh my God, you're so close to the person behind you." It's like, no, they're close to me.
On the other hand, it might be good to know how close a tailgater actually is to your bumper.
Maybe there'd be a way to add switchable power on top of that.
That would be pretty awesome.
Maybe that seems like a later project, but I could totally see that being a thing. In terms of Wabi Sabi, so the reason I've been using Ichigo mostly for Ubering recently was largely because my partner has a medical condition that prevented her from driving for a little while. We are going to be discovering, I'm praying that she is going to be taking over Ichigo again and driving again. And if that happens, then I'm going to get something for Wabi Sabi that's actually a car that I can Uber with, and we're going to go from there. Realistically, that's probably going to be something in the Crown Vic variety, something Panther body, because they're cheap, they're incredibly useful for Ubering and stuff like that, because everybody already sees them as a taxi. And
they'd be relatively comfortable.
And they're easy to work on. There's tons of people who have done tons of weird modifications to them. The engine is the same one that Ford put in fucking everything in the 90s. It's called the modular V8. It's roughly the same motor with a number of tweaks, but supposedly the current generation Mustang V8, the Coyote motor, will actually fit there because it's not different enough that they've moved where the engine mounts are.
So you could totally have fun driving your Uber and then having this engine under the hood that nobody expects.
Seriously. And even if we don't want to go ridiculous, you can take the motor out of an Aviator, which is what they did when they made the Mercury Marauder, which was the hot-rodded version of the Panther body. And they just took the motor out of their ginormous SUV, because it needed power to move the ginormous SUV, and stuffed it into their regular humdrum cop sedan. So making that work would actually not be terribly obnoxious, and there'd be a number of cool projects there. It would also be a thing, though, that if it turns out, though, that my partner's not going to be driving for the foreseeable future, I think it makes more sense to have Wabi Sabi be a motorcycle.
I like that idea. I think motorcycles are a little bit less intimidating to get started on.
Right.
Because it's, it has all the parts, but it's not... I think it'll be easier to figure out where, if you unplug that one thing and everything goes to shit, it'll be easier to figure out where that one thing is, so that, you're not just trying to, figure out this enormous car where that one wire went wrong.
Right, exactly. And I've even known people who have done motor swaps on bikes without, a crane. They can just muscle out. It's obnoxious, but if you have you and a buddy and enough, just pull out the motor with your bare hands. It's possible. It's not the safest thing in the world, but the point of that was just to show that every component in a motorcycle is so much lighter and so much easier to work with, as opposed to the fact that there's so many things in a car that you need specialized tools for, that you need lifts and jacks, and not everybody has those specialized several $1,000 tools.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and, it would be fun to work on a motorcycle too, because joyriding around would be great.
Yeah, having a motorcycle to ride would be fun, and on top of that, having just, I don't know, it seems like motorcycles are easy areas for fabrication, at least relative to a car, so it would be a good place to be learning things like welding, learning things like, just manufacturing technique. So why don't you tell me what's going on with Jeremiah? I know have you looked into the wheels at all?
So I still have the wheels sitting in my basement, which is pretty normal for me when it comes to projects. I'm pretty terrible about picking things up and actually making things happen. So right now we're looking at Jeremiah needing an oil change because the oil hasn't been done in about 8 months. And the car was, sitting in the driveway for most of the winter, and it really needs to happen. But I haven't done an oil change on my own yet, so that's going to be another thing that we can document for Burnt Toast Garage, and we can put up on the blog. I just need to steal your jacks, if that's all right.
Totally. I can come over and help at some point. When are you doing it?
I have no idea yet, but we can totally figure that one out.
Yeah, all right, let's talk in a bit. What about Van Helsing?
So Van Helsing, for those that are unaware, is the name that Amy has given the van dwelling project, which I'm really appreciating the working name right now. Love the pun. But it's, a lot of the stuff that I have researched for Van Helsing is actually up on the blog, because I've sort of been using that as my here's me thinking through my ideas kinds of posts. The one thing that is a little bit different is that I think it'd just be easier to not put a motorcycle inside the van. As much as I want a mobile garage and to joyride around Yellowstone, it'll just be so much easier to have it on a trailer. And we can figure out covering the trailer and everything like that, but fitting a motorcycle in with our bed and all of our other supplies is probably not the best life choice.
Especially considering, building a van that you can live in is in and of itself going to be kind of a challenge. So building a van that, not only are you going to live in, but at will converts into being able to store a motorcycle as well, that seems like its own additional nightmare. Let's focus on the nightmare at hand first.
Yeah, we need more storage space than a van would probably offer, if we're being real about it.
If you're going to include a motorcycle, certainly. I think a Chevy Express van. Have you looked at those at all?
I have not looked at those yet. Definitely on my list to do.
Okay. I think the Chevy Express van and any of the Chevy G-Series vans would be great options, because they both use just the common Chevy V8 architecture. Mm-hmm. The Express vans specifically use the LS, which is the more recent motor, and they use the LS in everything from vans and trucks and just everything from mini SUVs to the really high-end stuff. And the Camaro is on the LS platform. All of the ridiculous Corvettes of the time were on the LS platform. And I think probably to start, you could do a bunch of the supplemental mods. So you start with like radiator, oil cooling, oil catch can, just including stuff that will make the engine live a lot longer before we start adding a bit of power.
Which for a van would actually be really nice because it's once you've converted a van, if the engine dies, it might actually be worth it to replace the engine rather than have to redo an entire van for living space.
Right, completely agree. Especially considering we'll be able to do motor swaps on something like that because LS motors are ridiculously common. And on top of that, you can get LS motors as a crate motor. You can get LS motors pulled out of like Camaros and things that somebody has wrecked. So if the motor goes, you won't have trouble finding a decent motor to replace it with.
That's fair, and that's a really solid consideration. I hadn't thought as much about the motor up until this point, and I'm rapidly realizing that it's something I need to be like looking up and figuring out and listening to your advice on.
Well, I mean, if you're going to be doing the van as the conversion van, and it's also going to be our big automotive project for a while, I would encourage, there's a video I posted that I'm going to send you the link to after this. There is a company that builds 700 horsepower turbocharged express vans.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, and it's like, the best part about it is it's an all-wheel drive version, which means that at most drag strips you will like flat out destroy stuff like Camaros and Corvettes entirely because they've got a ton of power, don't get me wrong, but hooking up something like a Camaro or a Corvette in first gear while you're sitting there is its own like magic talent.
So I'm just gonna see myself racing like a Mini Cooper, for example, up the Continental Divide.
Can't wait. And on that note, it's actually a good time to be transitioning off. So thank you so much for listening to the first Burn Toast Garage podcast, and we hope to see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.